The atmosphere in the arena was not electric. It was restless, bordering on agitated. We were deep into the third hour of the broadcast, and the energy in the building had begun to curdle into a strange fatigue. The crowd had spent the last 20 minutes watching a championship celebration that felt forced, a segment designed to fill time rather than create history. You could see the audience shifting in their seats, checking their phones, the ambient murmur of 50,000 people creating a low, distracted hum that signifies a show losing its grip. The production team dimmed the lights for a commercial break, but when the feed returned, the house lights didn't come back up fully. Instead, a heavy amber gloom settled over the ring, casting long, unnatural shadows across the canvas. It wasn't a technical error. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on the lungs of everyone in the front row. The commentary team sat in confused silence. Their headsets live, but their voices absent, waiting for a cue that wasn't coming. Usually a return is signaled by a recognizable screech of guitar or a sudden explosion of pyrotechnics, a dopamine hit designed to trigger an immediate pop. This was different. This was the uncomfortable quiet of a storm front moving in, the drop in barometric pressure that makes your ears pop. The giant LED screens surrounding the stage flickered not with a produced graphic, but with static, like a signal struggling to break through interference. The champion in the ring, holding the belt high, lowered it slowly, their expression shifting from arrogance to genuine uncertainty. They looked toward the entrance ramp, not as a performer waiting for arrival, but as a person sensing a threat. The security guards at the barricade turned around, scanning the crowd, sensing a shift in the room's temperature. It wasn't excitement building in the darkness. It was dread. When the sound finally hit, it wasn't music. It was a distorted, low-frequency drone that rattled the rib cages of the viewers at home. Through the curtain walked a silhouette that was unmistakable yet deeply unfamiliar. Becky Lynch did not explode onto the stage with the swagger of the man or the eccentricity of big-time Becks. She walked out with a terrifying, methodical slowness, head bowed, her hair obscuring her face. She wore no elaborate entrance gear, no steampunk goggles, and no flashy coat to catch the light. She was dressed in dark, muted street gear, taped up heavily around her hands and shoulders, looking like she had come straight from a street fight rather than a locker room. The crowd's reaction was a chaotic mix of gasps and a delayed, confused roar that died down almost as quickly as it started. They didn't know whether to cheer or watch in silence. She moved down the ramp with a heaviness that suggested a burden, not a triumph. Her eyes were fixed on the canvas, refusing to acknowledge the fans reaching out over the barricades. There was no smiling, no posing, and no acknowledgement of the camera operators scrambling to get a clear shot. Michael Cole, usually the voice of hyperbolic excitement, spoke in a hushed, serious tone. Noting that she wasn't supposed to be here, that security had not cleared this, it felt like an invasion. As she climbed the steel steps, the camera caught her eyes for the first time. They were hollow, focused, and utterly devoid of the joy that usually accompanies a legend's return. She stalked the apron like a predator that hadn't eaten in weeks, ignoring the referee who was trying to enforce order. The arena fell into a stunned hush, the kind of silence usually reserved for injuries, as everyone realized this wasn't a skit. This was a reckoning. The confrontation that followed stripped away the veneer of sports entertainment. There was no microphone, no verbal exchange of insults, and no waiting for the bell. Becky slid under the bottom rope and stood nose-to-nose with the champion, who looked visibly smaller in the presence of such raw intensity. The air left the room. When the first strike was thrown, it didn't look like a wrestling move. It was a jagged, desperate forearm that connected with a sickening thud, knocking the champion back into the corner. The ensuing beatdown was uncomfortable to watch. It lacked the rhythm of a match. It was a frantic, grounded assault that looked more like a venting of frustration than a competitive bout. The referee signaled for the bell, but there was no match to stop. The crowd watched in a stunned paralysis. They wanted to chant, "This is awesome," but the energy was too dark, too violent. Becky didn't play to them. She didn't look for approval. She locked in the disarm her, not with the technical precision of a submission specialist, but with the intent to break the limb. The champion tapped frantically, screaming, but Becky stared 1,000 yards through the canvas, her teeth gritted, lost in a trance of aggression. It took 3 officials and a producer sprinting from the back to pry her off. When she finally released the hold, she didn't raise her arms in victory. She stood up, chest heaving, and looked at her trembling hands as if she didn't recognize them. The champion lay motionless, sold not as a defeated opponent, but as a victim. Becky rolled out of the ring and walked back up the ramp without looking back, leaving a scene of destruction that felt less like a wrestling segment and more like a crime scene. The camera followed her through the curtain, breaking the usual fourth wall of the broadcast. The backstage area, usually a hive of orchestrated chaos, was frozen. Other wrestlers, some still in their gear, peeked out from behind locker room doors, their faces stripped of character, watching a peer who had clearly crossed a line. We saw the production staff backing away, giving her a wide berth as she navigated the concrete hallway. There were no interviewers rushing to get a scoop. The fear was palpable. The background, you could hear the muffled shouting of Triple H and other executives, a chaotic blend of real-world concern and scripted outrage, blurring the lines until no one knew where the performance ended. Becky walked past the gorilla position without acknowledging the furious producers. She found a quiet corner of the loading dock, collapsing onto a shipping crate, burying her face in her hands. The camera held the shot from a distance, feeling intrusive, voyeuristic. This wasn't the triumphant return of a hero, it was the breakdown of a warrior who couldn't leave the war behind. The locker room chatter that leaked into the audio feed wasn't about championship opportunities or storylines. It was about concern for her well-being. The narrative had shifted instantly from "who will she fight" to "is she okay?" It was a masterclass in tension, making the audience feel complicit in the trauma of the industry. The silence in that loading dock spoke louder than any promo she could have cut. It was the sound of the isolation that comes with being at the very top, the crushing realization that the adrenaline of the ring is the only thing that makes the world make sense. As the broadcast faded to black, the lingering feeling wasn't excitement for the next week's show, but a heavy reflective melancholy. The viral clips circulating on social media within minutes didn't use the usual fire emojis or hype captions. They were captioned with questions. Return forced the audience to confront the reality of the character they worshipped. We demand our heroes return to us, that they sacrifice their bodies and their peace for our entertainment, but we rarely ask what they lose in the process. Becky Lynch standing over a fallen champion wasn't a display of dominance. It was a portrait of addiction. An addiction to the roar, to the relevance, to the lights. This moment wasn't designed to sell t-shirts. It was designed to change the texture of the show. It served as a grim reminder that the man is a persona that consumes the person underneath. As the viewer turned off their screen, the image that remained wasn't the violence in the ring, but that final shot of her sitting alone on a crate in the loading dock, isolated by her own greatness. The shock of the return had faded, replaced by a deeper, more unsettling narrative hook. We weren't asking if she could win the title again. We were left asking a far more dangerous question, one that keeps you watching even when you want to look away. She has everything a person could want: family, fame, legacies. So why does she look like she has absolutely nothing left to lose?